My name is Ming Tiampo. I am a professor of art history at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And I tell you where I'm from because I'd like to start the way we would normally start in my country, or one of my countries, which is with a land acknowledgement because of the ways in which we're thinking through the land in this panel. So it's about environment, but it's also about land. And in Canada, we would normally start with a land acknowledgement, which would go something like this. I would like to acknowledge the fact that we are seated here, speaking in the unceded, surrendered territories of, so the territory where I'm from is the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And then typically, the event would just proceed as normal. And there's a problem with this. And the reason for that is that what we do in these land acknowledgements is that we say, we acknowledge that we have stolen these lands, and then we just move on. And I had this long conversation with an Indigenous colleague and friend of mine, and we were thinking about what does land acknowledgement actually mean? What can land acknowledgements do? And she pointed out that for Indigenous peoples on the territories of other Indigenous peoples, when they are visitors, when they are guests, the land acknowledgement works somewhat differently. And what they do with that is that they think a little bit about why they're on those lands, how they're related to those lands, what their relations are. What are all of my relations on this land? So I will tell you what my relations are on this land in just a moment. But what I would like for you to think about, as I'm telling you about my story, is to think about what are the lands that you carry within yourself, and how do you relate to those lands? And in thinking about how you relate to those lands, I'd like for you to think a little bit about how we can open up to different ways of interacting with land, different ways of understanding our relations to the land that are a little different from just thinking through extraction and ownership. So what are some of the different ways in which we can think through our relations to the land is what I'm asking you. And so in telling you why I'm here, I'd like to acknowledge the various networks that I'm a part of and the beautiful invitation that I received from John and from Iftikhar to come as one of the faculty members of Mahasa, which is a group of art historians and artists and curators who are thinking through how we connect art histories across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. But I'm also part of other networks that are here. And here I'd like to think about all of these networks and how they intersect with each other and how they build on each other, each of these networks being an invitation to further dialogue. So there's Art Schools of Asia. There's also Intersecting Modernisms. There's also Asia Forum. So the ways in which all of these different networks layer upon each other create a strength and a sort of condensation of discourse, which hopefully will function for this and for all of us as an invitation to think together. And it's through this that I'd like to make one final point before I hand over to Hammad, which is that I'd like for us to think a little bit further about what this biennial is enabling. What are the affordances of the biennial format, and what are the affordances of this gathering? What is it an invitation to? To whom is it an invitation? And how do we use these invitations to build better worlds together? So, Hammad.
Thank you, Ming. You hear me? Yeah, here we go. Thank you, Ming. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to sort of respond in kind, and my own sort of land acknowledgement is I was born about 30 minutes drive from here in a hospital called Sir Gangaram Hospital. Now, just the juxtaposition of those two things, the title Sir with the name Gangaram that you would probably recognize as perhaps, you know, belonging to a land that is now divided by a line, will tell you something about the entanglements that land carries and the people carry with it. In my case, both my grandmothers crossed that line, their family crossed that line at the creation of Pakistan. And as in a story which is common to millions of people here and in India, the propertied were given properties to compensate for what they had lost. And in a beautiful evocation of that kind of privilege, Nida Rahman quoted the historian Atif Mia, or the economist Atif Mia, and I'll try and read this out. Land is the favored vehicle through which the powerful extract rent from the economy. Now that is a description that is by no means unique to where we are. Having lived in places like Hong Kong, living now in London, as I've done for most of my life, you can apply those to very, very different cities at different stages of development in different continents in different time. So one of the things that we will also want to do, I think, and with many of the speakers here who've been playing a part in the biennial and outside the biennial, is to think about what this gathering is doing in terms of making that rent-seeking visible, but also in whatever small way possible, counteracting it. And in that way, I will want to acknowledge my own networks. I'll just focus on one, is that I've been one of the unofficial advisors for the Lahore Biennial before it was formed, and in an office which was the size of about this stage, and have visited all three. And one of the things that I have certainly observed, and I'm not the only one, I'm sure, is that the biennial itself is an attempt at making things public. In the very fact that there isn't a host institution which contains it. And in this particular edition, it's not an attempt, it's been realized. The actual commissions within Mall Road, this artery that divides the city or connects it, of 3 public projects that will stay as a gift to the city and also make us think. One of those projects is by Farida Batool, who is sitting next to me now. And with that, I'm going to pass you on, Farida.
Thank you, Hammad, for a very interesting introduction to the talk. My work, which is right in the middle of major city square on Mall Road, is a critique of both colonization process, because Mall Road is a colonial project, and also the patriarchy. This was an opportunity by LBF and Biennale when they asked me to do something in public for a permanent installation. I have been really working lot of time with public spaces, working with communities, working with large projects. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity to just do something which I've been feeling, I've been researching, and I've been practicing for a long time, both in my research, my writing, my art. So the task was where and how. So I selected GPO Square. Can we go to the next one? And oh, okay. I'll just do it. So there is this video. Can I just play this one while I'm talking? So how to? No. In the one, yeah, the horizontal, vertical one, yes. So so the GPO Square is a vast area in the middle of the major empty, barren square of Mall Road, which is constructed on top of Orange Metro stations. And in 2016, I was also part of the protests which were taking place against the development of metro train project, because the kind of technology they were using was very detrimental to the heritage sites of around that area. So the demand was either to go to the tunnel technology and not affect the foundations and the lifestyle of an ecosystem of that area. But somehow in Lahore High Court, they won the case, but in Islamabad, they lost. So the metro train came into existence. And what they left this whole area was a concrete structure. And no tree could be, we can't plant anything because there is no ground underneath, and the water cannot go in under, so there has to be a ceiling. So this large piece in the center of the city, as part of the development project, as a continuation of colonization, became the barren space. And when you move around this, so one thing which you notice is heat, hot sun, and very, very bland area. So what I wanted to do was to do a critique, and this is the pattern. If you see in the bottom, right bottom, this pattern was taken from Victorian garden design of hedges, and I wanted to develop that, which disentangles into the plant forms or planters, which are very indigenous. And in the center of that, I wanted to place a fountain. And fountain is a gift. A marble fountain is a gift from colonial legacy. You know, they used to place in different parts of the center squares of the city. So I wanted to cut it into half and splice it and place it in the middle and middle of the design. And then the indigenous plants will be planted, you know, on the surrounding area. So the colonial structures disentangles and the indigenous plants grows. So that was the idea. And so this is how I wanted to look at how we look at the challenge, how we confront the challenge of no ground underneath, no grass, no soil, and there were special techniques employed, you know, to save the surface so that there is no seepage underneath. So that's why everything has to be raised very high in terms of the plants. And do I have time to a minute? So there were other projects which I did on the Mall Road. So Mall Road has been center of my research for a long time. And this is just a video which I am playing to give you the teaser of my documentation which I did of people setting the buildings on the Mall Road, them setting them on fire, you know, by themselves because they were angry at something which took place outside Pakistan. So in their reaction, so they set it on fire. And this particular building was a restaurant owned by a minority in Lahore. So that was the first target. So after many years, because the protest and the firing, the destruction happened in 2006, and I did this installation in 2022. And after so many years, this was the first time that this place was opened to public. So we did a kind of, you know, exhibition involving indigenous practices, involving community, local practitioners, and constructing a huge environment, a lively environment, so that, you know, people start taking ownership back to the space. So these are some of the glimpses. So these are the drawings which I did on that. And so these are some of the works which I did of floods in the city. So I'm taking photographs and then printing them on glass of the flood water which entered my home. And so I am taking these water reflections on the marble floor. So it is again a critique of, you know, how we use certain materials, and what are its causes, and how it affects and impacts our aesthetics, how it impacts everything. So these are some of the, and these are the protest and developments of the metro train, which was happening around the. And I don't think I have time to talk about Awami Art Collective projects. So, anytime, the next time, or thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. It was just wonderful to have this glimpse into the work that you're doing in the city. And I guess a couple of ideas that I'd like to pull out of what you just showed us for the conversation that as it develops is this idea of taking back the land, right, and allowing the flowers and the plants to take back the space between the fountains as part of your critique, but also as an envisioning of new futures. So I think that that's probably something that we'll be able to build upon as we have this conversation. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time to learn more about everything that you're doing. It sounds so exciting. So our next two speakers are Dicky Takndare and Dirgantoro. And Dicky is from the Udeido Collective, and they'll both be speaking about their work that's in the biennial.
Well, good evening. I am Dicky. I'm speaking as a spokesperson of Udeido Collective. We put up for one of our work in the Lahore Biennale in the YMCA, but I will not talk about that. I will invite you to just see the slide in front, and if you see something that you want to know, please asking. And we are come from West Papua. If there's some of you who never heard about West Papua, the territory? This is the first time for you? Oh no. Okay, so West Papua basically lies in the Pacific Island. If you open your Google map, it's like a big island, looks like a kangaroo. So it is above Australia. And it has very complicated political history between Dutch Indonesia. So this context still become the background of our practice, and as a place who become the oppressed society, we have to figure out how to put our art into this context, and we try to do a lot of work with people because of the characteristic of the oppressed societies. The young generations are cut out from their past or their history, and that's why we have a lot of projects they've done inside the community or together with peoples in the community, and involve some elders, also young generations, some childrens, and try to maintain the transmissions of the local or the indigenous knowledge from the old generation to young generations, and in some way we also address some critical issues regarding what's happened in the middle of the people. So this is some of our projects that we've done in the West Papua, in some places, and mostly of them are you see what we bring these young artists to see the site, and the elders become part of the practice. So, like for example, we have a concept that we call karewari. If you see in the pictures, there are some houses construction. It's called karewari in the West Papua. It's the place where you send your young generation to learn about anything to become adult. But then the Dutch come and the Dutch destroyed all these things. They burn it all, and by the time these elders, or we call it abu, guru, master, they don't have any institution to support their knowledge. They don't have places in also formal education system that brought by Dutch or Indonesia, because so they just put aside. So in this practice, we try to reconstructing the karewari by putting them in their place they used to be, and and we addresses a lot of issues during the encounter between these young and old masters. And by this kind of practice, we used to, kind of make new collectives besides this Udeido. We have like 4 or 5 different kind of collectives that works in Papua. Some of them are not active anymore. But then this kind of practice that we still try to maintain, because we need more people to address many fundamental issues in the society, but in the different way. I mean, in the non-violence ways, because we have a lot of protesters, activists, get arrested by Indonesian cops simply because you try to speak up about things happen in your people. And we see that arts can have this role in this part, also addressing a lot of issues like environment. And yeah, it runs very well for Udeido, not very well because we have a lot of trouble by doing that in Indonesia. But we still keep going on, and yeah, well, that's things have bring to here. Thank you.
My name is Wulandani. I'm not part of Udeido Collective, but rather I've worked alongside Udeido Collectives for a number of years now. So if you haven't seen their work in the Biennial, please do have a look. So I guess I'll just speak to that work a little bit. So Koreri projection is it's a different. I guess it's a second version of the bigger one that was in Jogja Biennial in 2019. So what you see in Lahore Biennial, it's a smaller scale, if you like, a second version. So it's modeled a little bit like, I guess, the Station of the Cross. You know, where you go, even you do your pilgrimage and you stop at particular stations during your pilgrimage, and then you reflect on that events that happened during that time before you reach at the station, and then you reach redemption. So that's the idea of Koreri projection. But at the same time, even though it's modeled after the Stations of the Cross in Christianity and Catholic, but it's also about the spiritual beliefs and the myth that Udeido tried to revive through their practice. Because as Dicky mentioned, that it's a sensitive line between visible political activism and cultural revivalism. That's what they're trying to balance in their practice. Dicky mentioned, sort of the difficulties in voicing direct protest about what's happening in Papua. And so for them, a lot of them are based in Jogja, right? But some of your members also still in Papua. So it's like, how do you voice a protest in the belly of the beast? Right? So, but at the same time, Udeido is also connected to a network of student activists in Jogja, particularly Papuan student activists. And in our conversation, we like to talk about, so how do you, where does Udeido sit in this broader activist network in Jogja? And, you're trying very hard not to be one or the other, but you're trying to embrace the different communities, even within the student activism in Papua. Papuan student activists, they have different views as well. Do we work together, or do we continue to resist, right? And it's that fine balance that they try to, I guess, articulate through their practice. And this means, not necessarily be Papua, but it's a Papua that's still in conversation with the rest of Indonesia, particularly in Jogja. Right? You try to do that in their own practice, but also in their studio, where they're deeply embedded within the local village. Dicky should probably say a little bit more about what you do in the studio, right? Because that's also pretty much your practice. Yeah. But I shall leave it at that for now.
Would you like to take a minute to tell us a little bit about your studio?
Studio?
Yeah. We have.
Yeah. So I have to tell you the context before I move to what we're doing. if you are come from East Indonesia, East Indonesia are mostly Pacific Islanders, and in the route we are most connected to many Pacific Islanders in the east, in the what we call the Pacific world. So when you come from East Indonesia and you study in some cities in Java, usually you have this kind of stereotypes and stigma. For example, I myself try to find places to rent, to open the studio. From the very beginning. I have to spend like 7 times, get rejected, simply because I come from the East and simply because I come from Papua. And they have some stereotypes like, oh, they are troublemaker, drunkards, blah blah blah. Things happen in Java, many cities in Java. The thing is, many of us come to Java to study, so we are lucky to have these places to accept us with the very also dynamical situations. But then we have to think about how do we survive in this very, very different people, cultures, and things. So we are trying to embrace the local people in Jogja, try to involve them to be part of our practice. Like we are doing paintings, their walls together. They have like the concept of watching, night watching, like pos ronda, and we are working with them to do the paintings on their this post. And by doing this kind of activity, we got places to stay there for a while, because many people get rejected in many places, and we see like in our cases, art can be very powerful weapons to connecting people, and we have a lot of conversation about politics, about social issues, why we have a demand of self-determination, independence from Indonesia, and many conversation happen during this process. And people sometimes don't really agree what we are talking about or think about, but they hear. They begin to hear. That's.
Thank you. I think that idea of voice and being able to hear, who hears, who shares, and I think I was actually sort of just thinking about the connections between what you've just shared with us, and thank you for sharing that larger context, and Farida's project around how to turn a protest, and her larger, the earlier project, where looking at a place which suffered violence against a minority, a much persecuted minority, and how do you bring that into a conversation without a confrontation. I think those are things that perhaps we take on to our next speaker. I'm going to invite Elisa to talk to us next.
Well, first of all, just my gratitude for being invited to be on this panel and to speak and to be here in general in Lahore and in Pakistan. Thank you to the Lahore Biennale Foundation. Thank you to A-Field, the organizers, the supporters, for this opportunity. And the last 50-some hours in Pakistan have been amazing, and meeting all of you. So thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to reflect on land as well, the entanglements of land, as you just mentioned. And then the word stigma kept with me this idea of stigmas of land. And in Caracas, where I live and practice in Venezuela, the iconic Avila Mountain is a reserve that is everything above 1,000 meters above sea level, and very loved by most any Venezuelan. Has kind of a photograph or a painting of the Avila Mountain in their living room. And all the water that falls on this mountain and springs from this mountain ends up here in the core of the valley, in the River Guaire, which could not be more forlorn and violated. And it is the sewage channel of the city, and the way everybody thinks of it is in the most negative of terms. The closest rapport might be just basically on the edge of a highway or on the edge of a 4-lane roadway. And so some years ago, first through a competition, we kind of started to understand the potential that this system has, some 40 kilometers through the city going in the east-west axis, linking existing public spaces, potential public spaces, and most importantly, for me, because this has been the concentration of my practice for nearly 2 decades now, all of the barrios, or the self-built neighborhoods that connect to this system with the potential of making a very fragmented city into a completely seamless and integrated one, if we were to think of this river as a public space, as a commons. Lisa Blackmore calls these the hydro commons. And so, emboldened by a newly founded NGO in 2018 and the success of work that we had been doing in the Barrio La Palomera, I decided to take on this other kind of lingering concern of mine with the river in 2020. So the idea was to do it through children in schools of primary school age, and yet COVID hit. So we were no longer going to be able to go into the schools and work with children. So we started by producing an archive of all research that we could get our hands on then, which is compiled into a website, rioguaire.org, going all the way back to the 1760s when the city of Caracas was founded, and compiling copious amounts of information that basically started to reveal that the narrative of the Rio Guaire in Caracas had been wildly different in various periods of its past. And so even very fun things that we found, for example, this idea of a sky train, very typical of the 1950s and modernity and these kinds of thoughts. But to compile a multi or interdisciplinary team of biologists and botanists, ecologists, hydraulic engineers, writers, artists, architects, planners, bird watchers, and to take what they had already kind of put out there in the world, or knowledge that they had that had not yet been recorded in some way, and commission some of these writings, which are all, again, there are several dozens in this website. And when COVID finally did allow us to be more social again, we started having walks where artists, photographers were invited to come along with us, writers that we hoped would help us to understand, record, have these encounters with everything that, although under our noses in the middle of the city, we had never really come close up and personal to look at. And so these visits were well attended. The response was of enormous surprise, even though often difficult and completely conflated with this idea of the river as infrastructure, as something dominated and controlled through engineering. And we discovered existing infrastructure that had been built in the late 70s right along the river as walkways with stone and durable materials that nobody knew about. That is how forgotten and off the radar this river is for the population. And also finding that towards the eastern end of Caracas, where the Barrio Petare, it is the largest barrio in Caracas, children aspiring, sort of showing us this is what the river should be. It should be a place to go to for recreation, a place of joy. And so once we finally were able to connect with schools again, and after all that work, we kind of took on a different approach with 2 artists, decided how do we bring this river closer to the children? And so through water samples and rubbish samples that we collected in 12 different stations, sound, and then collaborated with dancers and performing artists to produce this game where through various actors, many of them non-human, the children would choreograph a way to save the Rio Guaire from the debris, from the waste, from the sewage, from all the adversary conflicting forces that degrade it. And then in 2023, having kind of let all that seep in, we regrouped and understood that a river so violated in the imaginary of any Caraqueño, or at best just simply off its imaginary radar about the city, had only encountered ideas about that river through sanitation projects. And these had always been titanic, sort of imaginably difficult and expensive for sure, and of the scale of the state. So the citizen himself had never imagined any kind of agency with respect to the river. And this kind of growing group of friends of the river, we, in a day that was celebrating the anniversary of Caracas, kind of began understanding that by bringing us close to the river as a public commons, we could maybe by pieces begin to see its transformation. And so there are 16 kilometers that are accessible with very little investment. And so by piecing it as 6 segments, it brings it down to a scale that is possible. And by understanding politics and territory, we could understand that there was one segment that could possibly be an easier sell to politicians. And what we have since been able to do is basically, through support from the governor, have enough funds to produce the project of a public space, and that would not need the jurisdiction of the central government, which would be very, very difficult, but the jurisdiction of the municipality, which is much more accessible. And the project is as minimal and inexpensive as we could possibly make it, but yet still produce a change in the perception of that river edge as a public commons, as a space for the city. And this will finish, and then I'll be wrapping up. But the good news is that over the past year, and lobbying many different important agencies and interdevelopment banks and so forth, we do have enough funds to produce 1.8 kilometers of a first segment that will be an agreement with the mayor to begin this transformation in early January next year. So something that to me would have been absolutely unfathomable, and how would I ever come even close to producing some form of change, has somehow like been dissected into pieces that are manageable and can begin a pilot for perhaps a snowballing effect of future change. Thank you very much.
Thank you for telling us about that powerful project and the ways in which you're working with communities to do that. Just a couple of ideas that I'll pull out here before we move on to our next speaker. It really connects very much with what we've been doing over the past few days with the River Ravi, and also Nida Rahman's lecture yesterday on the unruly landscapes of Lahore, right? Just thinking about the river as a commons, as a public space, as a living being, and thinking about different new ways that we can imagine our relations to that land. So thank you so much for doing that. Our next speaker is Abraham Onoriode Oghobase. I've got more to say, which is really this question of sharing. I love how you started with this question of the entanglements of land. You know, one of the problems that I found that I was speaking to earlier when I was talking about the land acknowledgement was to think about, you know, how do we share these spaces, and how do we do so responsibly? What are the ways in which we can be guests, good hosts, and also how do we live lightly on the land, not just in terms of our relations with other humans, but with the more than human. So, you know, Hammad, finished up your comment just now on Dicky and Wulan's presentation by thinking about who hears, who shares. And I think that question of the sonic is really important, but also the ways in which the sonic really opens up the relationality to a community and to multiples. Thinking through, how land can also constitute community.
Thank you very much. So great to be here, and just short of words. I'd like to just read briefly my point because I have the tendency to drift. So I'll just read a bit about what I do, and then I'll just expatiate, by just talking about the images, so that I have a clear focus, if you don't mind. Yeah. So my work engages with issues around knowledge production, land, colonial history, and representation by deconstructing traditional modes of making and experimenting with the narrative and material potential of images and objects. So I'll basically just expand now based on that. The very first image you saw basically was images that I produced in a place called Jos in Nigeria that was extracted by British colonialists from 1910 to 1950 before oil was discovered. For those of you who might not know, Nigeria was actually colonized by the British. Land is very central to my practice, and just thinking about the challenges that comes with photography. Photography is a two-dimensional medium. How do you engage a medium that is so flat? I think one of the ways and forms, strategies that I've devised is to engage the materiality of the medium, but also engage photography in an expanded practice using installation as a way to engage the forms, and using collage or layering as strategies of engaging different times. Because it's really complicated to just, talk about specific, period in time using photography as a medium. I think for me, it's that challenge that I actually enjoy when I'm working. And I would say one of the things that I've done again is to, because of the limitation of photography, one of the things that has helped me is to also think about archives, because archives also help in giving some type of depth to the overall narrative of colonial history, history of extraction, even looking at the complexity of representation within the context of land and extraction. So you see things like the methodological practice landscape and methodological practice miners, for example. This is the same land that was extracted of tea mining, but I'm interested in the residue and the legacy that's been left behind by that action. One of the things that I find fascinating also is the fact that, text and diagrams can be used in ways that, can be used in a very poetic way, which I sort of really like because it gives me a sense of abstraction, and it can make the work sort of like expand in ways that, I might not have thought of. Two books come to mind that I was so fortunate to have gotten on one of my visits to Johannesburg in 2015. One of the book was actually a methodological practice book that had the British diagram of mining, methodological practice. Fascinating, 2 volumes, volume 1 and 2. And it's basically a book that had these diagrams that were meant for extraction, manual guide for Witwatersrand, but also other similar fields that the British were actually colonizing, including Nigeria. And within the book itself, you find that the Governor General was actually in the famous Governor General of Nigeria, which actually named Nigeria, Frank Lugard, actually was stationed in Cape Town, and then later they moved him to Nigeria actually, and then stayed in the south, and that's actually Lugard, So the reason I'm saying this is that it's very complicated to just use the photograph of land to talk about land without thinking about metaphor and thinking about ways that you can actually ground the work to make it very deep and have some type of depth. So it's almost like getting the belly of this conversation. What is land? What constitutes land? And I think that land is not just in a literal sense, the physical land. Land is about time, is about documents, it's about numbers, digits, about diagrams. There's almost like an archaeological exploration in ways to give me some type of understanding. Sometimes I get lost in it, but other times it drives me home again. And in ways that also I try to also listen. In ways, again, I also try to, thank you, I also try to listen to the images themselves to also kind of like guide me. This is a presentation for the Venice Biennale for the Nigeria Pavilion, which I happen to, I've met John in Venice. So it's these are archives from the Wiscovitz collection from Northwestern University, Chicago. And this archive actually housed colonial archives that has a lot of black bodies within them, from Uganda to Nigeria to South Africa. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that, you know, I'm like, okay, what are these images doing in this collection? Like, what does it mean to have this sort of like collection in this institution? And I was very interested in paying homage to this subject. So I started thinking about, you know, using these methodological diagrams as some type of plinth, you know, to kind of like, you know, place these subjects on them. You can see some of them are very domesticated images, you know, of people, you know. If you look at the larger body of work, you could just see some of them also playing sports and doing all kinds of gesture of the body. But I found ways to kind of like incorporate them with the methodological diagrams in ways to kind of like show resilience and show some sense of like agency also. Yeah, I guess I don't have much time, but yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll come back to it, but thank you. And before we move on, I really wanted to thank you for drawing attention to actually the work that photographs can do, particularly when dealing with the archive. And we often think about the archive as this completist instrument, but you sort of here remind us that alongside these records, there are also ghosts that lurk within archives, and the role of the artist, if you like, to shine attention on them. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Köken.
Thank you very much. So my name is Köken Ergun. I'm an artist from Istanbul, and with my Indonesian collaborator, we made an animation film called China, Beijing, I Love You. It's in the Alhambra Art Center. You have 3 more days to see it. It's half an hour film, so I won't be able to show everything. But the film, apart from its title, maybe we can talk about it later, gives agency to 2 minerals that is unearthed, extracted for all the mobile phones you're holding in your hands right now, all the computers you're looking at, all the cars or motorcycles that you're using, especially if it's an electronic vehicle. So the batteries that we are using today in all these devices are powered by nickel and cobalt, among other minerals. And maybe we can play the film, please. In this film, you see the story of the extraction of, yeah, you can mute it for now. But that's a good sound. No, actually, that's a good sound. Move forward a little bit, please, when we see the nickel coming to the city. Indonesia is one of the nickel production reserves. It holds the biggest reserves of nickel in the world. And Democratic Republic of Congo holds the largest reserves of cobalt in the world.
Pergianku bukanlah kehendak. Mereka yang memaksaku keluar dari sana.
So this is the prologue of the film where Nickel is explaining that she's on a constant exile because she's exiled by the humans, extracted because of her powers to make the batteries.
Aku bisa membuatmu sakit.
Yeah, from here we can play. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, cobalt is extracted by children. It's what is called artisanal mining. It is not extracted by machines because cobalt can be reached by small hands. So that's why children are put to work, and This labor is invisible. We don't see, we don't hear about them. And this is Cobalt speaking about her own exile.
Now, here. I am the cobalt, I am the cobalt from the earth. I do not leave at my
We have to change the number logos of the company.
Force me to come out of
But they are like, you would understand if you know the subject, who those companies are. For example, one is Glencore.
I want to land back.
Okay, now we can go to the YouTube videos, downloaded versions. So I'm just going to quickly show you. Oh, sorry. I'm normally a filmmaker which does documentaries, and I did make this animation with an Indonesian illustrator or artist, animation artist, but it's actually informed by, it is a documentary. It is informed by real information. So during our research, we focused on the islands of Sulawesi. Sulawesi is a very big island in Indonesian archipelago, and the nickel actually basically comes from there, most of it. And in a town called Morowali, or a plant called Morowali, where BYD is actually making its batteries from this nickel, there has been numerous uprisings of laborers, and it is, as Dicky would know, it's not known so much in the Indonesian general public, no? I mean, only a few people don't know about this. So how do we know about the workers who are rioting put on TikTok, and then it ends up in YouTube, their own videos or their demonstrations? So in the film, which you will see that scene of the riots, all the slogans that is voiced by actors are actually based on the real slogans that the workers are doing during their very highly dangerous uprising, because people have been injured and almost killed, sometimes killed, in these riots because the police is really suppressing them very heavily. So we came across from our research, maybe we can go this one? Play it from... Yeah, so this is the plant of it's giant, you know, you can see it on Google Earth. So this is one of the demonstrations probably 4 years ago, where the police, the security forces answered with tear gas and very, very tight security and violence. This is a co-venture between an Indonesian company. It has to be by law, it has to be one Indonesian company, but the real extractor is a company from China, which is a consortium of many companies, of course related to the Communist Party of China, the state of China. But that doesn't mean that only China is extracting. In the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's mostly European and American companies extracting, or let's say using the human force to extract it. We can skip forward a bit when the police... Exactly, this is when they start the water cannons. It's one of the leaders of the riots.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hidup rakyat!
Hidup rakyat means long live the people. You'll see that in the film.
Saudara-saudara, kita hadir
Let's
di
go back to
tempat
the
ini,
menu.
dan saya hari ini berada di tengah.
And some of the demonstrations, maybe let's do this. They're talking about their working conditions and living conditions. Oh, this is talking about the dust. Can we go forward in this a little bit? Maybe here? You don't see me, but like 2 minutes or 3 minutes? Yeah, play that, please.
Kenapa Anda setiap hari berhadapan dengan yang namanya debu?
Debu means dust. So he's saying we don't know the consequences of our, like the pollution that is affecting us right now. The dust, we don't know what's happening, what is making to us, to our people in the village or the nature, but it's probably going to be dangerous later. Like we didn't know the effects of coal on human bodies in the beginning in the Industrial Revolution. Please, let's go to the menu again. I'll show you one last slide. Let's try this, Aksi demo. This one, the first one. And this one has the employers. That's good. No, the sound is good. Yeah.
Kita melihat gedung-gedung mewah yang menjadi pusat eksploitasi kekayaan alam kita.
How they're exploited, and while their working condition is so bad, the employers are living in great conditions outside of the compound. Again, you hear the same slogan, long live the people. Okay, so now we're gonna go back to the film. So when I was doing this, actually we didn't know each other, but Dicky was in touch with my friend slash producer Riksa, and then we were also talking about Papua. We didn't include Papua that much in the film, except for one scene where the SpaceX is being launched from Papua, West Papua. I mean, they want to, but and Dicky is part of a group who's trying to stop it in Biak Island. So now this is for me a good chance to see now show you how we use this material and turned it into an animation. So those of us who sometimes ask questions to ourselves, like, is documentary only with the one man going with the camera around? No, it's not. Like, you can make a documentary with animation technique as well. So let's, I'm guessing 15. Watch it for me. It's just 2 minutes or 1 minute. Not even 1 minute. You can put the volume up. Yeah.
setiap hari berhadapan dengan yang namanya debu. Sekarang kita tidak tahu dampaknya, tapi ke depan akan kita rasakan akibatnya. Tanah ini telah diduduki dan dijajah oleh investasi. Kita berangkat bersama. Dobrak, 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 dobrak. Lawan, 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 lawan. Dobrak, 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 dobrak. Lawan, 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 lawan. Dobrak, 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 dobrak. Lawan, 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 lawan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that mesmerizing film. The question that you asked before you showed us that last clip, can documentary be more than just a person with their camera? I'd like to ask you a question that draws from something that Abraham was saying, actually, which was that he works poetically and allows abstraction to expand what the photograph is doing. And you were talking about how you can't talk about land without metaphor. I'd like for both of you maybe, and if we have time, everybody else, to think about how does metaphor function, and why are you using these poetics in creating these works, and how does that function for you?
But I didn't use poetics like you did.
But why did you use animation and not just a regular? Yeah.
We were forced, actually. I mean, COVID changed many things, because I started this project as an animation, as a documentary about the Belt and Road Initiative in China's global expansion. But then the pandemic stopped me from traveling, and I asked myself a question: what can a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, do when he cannot no longer travel or do these films? And I was always against fiction for some reason, coming from a background in theater. I always wanted to capture reality with a camera, but then I said maybe it's possible to make an animation about it. And I found my partner online, Fetra Dano. We worked online together, and bit by bit, we built this piece. We will not be allowed into that factory to shoot, but now we made a work about it. So I had to use it. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's similar actually, but I would say it's about language, it's about language. And I think like for you, like the work opened up because you kind of like just moved to animation and just sort of like expanded, your thoughts and idea, and even more, even gave you even more. And it's very similar to how I think about archives. I think about, even using collage as strategy of form making, using layering, where you take one material, like say vellum paper, and place it on like a fiber paper, where you have two surfaces of different composition. I almost see myself like a visual composer in a way, like you're composing music. And I say this quite a lot, but there's something about ambient music and the use of repetition within the structure of the music that I find very fascinating in the way that I think about, composing my work and also working with archives, but also what constitutes time. How do you create feeling? You know what I mean? So and that's where it pushes you, where you begin to kind of like get into this rabbit hole, and it's
really interesting way of thinking about land. How do you create feeling, I think, because what has been missing so much in these extractive practices are these practices of feeling. And what does it mean when we put that back into the equation? Another thing that I might bring to this conversation is the idea of reading against the grain or along the grain, as Anne Stoller, the anthropologist, has written about. That when there is a gap in the archive, what does one do? When there is a gap in your access, what does one do? And this is where poetics and art can play a role.
I think one of the other things which also sort of struck me, particularly looking at your two projects, was this active engagement with histories, with flows, and thinking about different modes with which to access history. So in Farida, you're literally accessing history through the building itself. You're trying to use the building itself as an archive. The walls will teach us. And with you, Dicky, and your sort of collective project, you started with such an emphasis on that intergenerational exchange, thinking about those possibilities of activation, and I wonder if you will both wanted to just briefly comment on how successful you think those attempts have been in your cases. How does that history live beyond that moment?
Looking at the buildings, looking at the material was very important. But for this particular project, what I really enjoyed and learned while working with the government organization, because this was not possible, was to see how the erasure of our indigenous plants from the list of the official accounts has taken place. So looking at also the archives and the history in another manner. For example, I wanted to have certain plants placed in that square, and when I was working with them, it was very difficult to place those names in the list, because according to their list they don't exist as plants, although we see them. As I showed them pictures of, I see it around the roads everywhere, and they say, but they are not plants. I said, then what they are? So they say they are wild plants, and for them they were not lucrative, they were not commercial, they were not people, they were not generating funds. So for me, to look at even those kind of, recent histories or documentation, which erases your knowledge, local wisdom is also very important. And for this particular project, like the Jhund word was something they said, oh, but you can't have that, because this is kana, this reed is not a plant, it's not a local thing.
So it's that minorization into the natural world.
Yes. So there are different kinds of histories and different kind of material. So shifting from the building to people, ecologies to this basic plant was very, very interesting aspect of working on this particular project.
Yes. Yeah, I want to address this questions about metaphor, I think. Well, if you see some Palestinian protester raise their flag and took to the street with the flag, it's remarkable, You go to Indonesia and raise the Morning Star flag of West Papua and you go to jail by maybe 15 years. The last case is 15 years. So we have to play very carefully in addressing some issues, And for example, the case of Korean projection that you've seen here in the Lahore Biennale, it was the little part of what exactly the Korean projection that we've put into the Jogja Biennale. It likes the 8 different phases or sections that have to be walked one by one until you entering the Korea itself, which means like the promised land. So if you see the flag of West Papua, it has like the 7 blue strips and 1 star. So the Korea projection that we put in Jogja Biennale, actually the metaphor of the flag itself. That is the way we raise the flag, and then we talk to some of our friends like, you give salute to our flag, and then how come? By coming to our works, yeah. So that's how we play, because you cannot talk about that very explicit about what are you addressing to, and I think most people also can be seen this metaphor as a very poetic aspect of the work itself, because we are like standing in the middle of the activism and creating art, you also considering how to design the aesthetics part of the art, but also addresses some fundamental issues. So we kind of in the middle of this kind of stuff. I think Wulan will elaborate more about that, because last time she writes very long journals about this very work.
Thanks, Dicky. I just want to highlight one point, also responding to Ming's point about archive. So there's one station in Koreri, the original, the first version of Koreri, which is actually Dicky's work. So Dicky, please correct me if I'm incorrect in a few things. So how do you write or read against the grain or against the archive or alongside archive when there's no archive, so to speak, of in the first place? So this is what's important, I think, particularly important about that aspect in Koreri projection. So Dicky recreated some of the photographs of cultural activists of Papua, late cultural activists that has long championed, Papuan land rights, indigenous rights and issues, Papuan cultural identity during the New Order regime. Because these important cultural figures, they're very influential through their music making performances, but they were jailed and executed or killed by Indonesian military. And then, so Dicky recreated that whole wall of photographs. But then if you don't know the context, you don't know who they are, right? So this needs a bit of, reading smartly when Dicky inserted the images of these activists in their work. And then I really remember what you said, Dicky, that Arnold Alp, one of the members, said that he was not killed because of his music, but he was killed because he was a curator, because he curated a lot of Papuan exhibitions and cultural identities, like foregrounding that Papuanness. Just, yeah, thought I'd just add on that.
I mean, the crucial thing is not to design yourself into something that isn't alone sufficient or even relevant. It's the people's understanding, affection, relationship with the river, which is non-existent or is bubbling into being something much more existent. And for me, it was a beautiful understanding through the work with communities and self-built neighborhoods that as an architect, I have been like taught to think that the design aspect is the kind of tool to affect transformations, and it makes no sense unless there is a kind of a constituency behind it. There are, you know, a number of actors that are engaged and sort of feel connected to it. And so to build affection for land, for a river, or hydrocommons, is something that I think an artistic practice or a cultural practice can aid in producing. And part of it was maybe bringing a history to the river and showing that the narrative had been very near. It was a pastoral destination for people. It was a place to spend your picnics or Sundays with your family in the early part of the 20th century. There were paintings that showed the river in a beautiful light, just as positively as you could see the mountain, which is forever and always shown with great deal of affection. So to just open up this possibility for people to imagine themselves relating to a river in an absolutely different way than they relate to it right now. And that affection even carries further. I mean, this morning, Dicky and I went out of our way to go meet and get to know the Ravi River here in Lahore, and felt, I think both of us, deeply concerned for the river. And, you know, I just think that bringing people there, walking along the river, just experiencing it, that possibility of an encounter that one has with people, we can have with bodies and with other entities. And affection is incredibly powerful. So
I think that's actually one of the things, maybe if we start to wrap up, that connects, I think, all of you, is in helping us think about land not as situated, but as a series of flows, as flows of infrastructure, like roads and water, but also of people, but of histories, but perhaps most importantly of feeling, of affection, of concern. And think about those possibilities when we think about land, rather than elements of extraction, use or ownership.
Absolutely. I might also add memory to that, right? Instead of thinking through just history, but through these bottom-up memories that are being dredged up by these archival practices that look in the gaps of the historical archive in order to reimagine what isn't there. So perhaps this might be a place for us to invite all of you to think a little bit further about your relationships with the lands within you, the lands that you occupy, the lands that you pass through, and to maybe think with us in a reception that is taking place where exactly? Upstairs, yeah. So there's a reception for an exhibition upstairs, and it would be really nice for us to continue these conversations with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks
and thank you to all of our speakers.
Thank you.